Hello there, and welcome to Dream Past Diaries. I'm truly glad you've made it here. Maybe it's been a long day, or maybe you're the kind of dreamer who prefers to drift off to the sound of quiet thoughts and forgotten mysteries instead of counting sheep. Either way, tonight's story is yours to enjoy. You don't have to do anything now, just rest. Let your thoughts slow, your breath deepen, and your body grow lighter, as if gravity itself has begun to fade away. Before the sun rose above the Mediterranean, before the gulls began their circling cries along the harbor walls, there was a peculiar hush that settled upon Alexandria, a silence so soft it seemed to belong to a different world altogether, one that existed between dreams and waking. The waves against the shore moved lazily, sighing against the stone piers as though exhausted by centuries of repetition, while the ships in the royal docks, draped in linen sails and painted with the eyes of protective gods, rocked in patient rhythm. Within the city, the narrow streets that wound between marble colonnades and dusty market stalls were still empty, though the faint smell of bread baking in clay ovens already drifted into the air. The great library, that vast sanctuary of scrolls and thought, slept too, its scholars gone to their beds, its endless shelves standing like silent sentinels of forgotten wisdom. And at the very heart of this city, whose walls had seen the rise and fall of kings, whose towers had mirrored the ambitions of empires, there stood the royal palace, an expanse of gold-veined stone, polished floors, and courtyards filled with still pools that reflected the first shimmer of dawn. There, within chambers perfumed with myrrh and rosewater, Cleopatra VII, last sovereign of the Ptolemaic dynasty, stirred softly upon her couch of ivory and silk. It was said that even in sleep she carried the stillness of a sphinx, serene, unknowable, watching from behind the veil of her dreams. Around her, the room was dim and warm, the air thick with incense, and the whisper of linen curtains that drifted gently in the sea breeze. Slender oil lamps burned in niches shaped like lotus buds, their flames trembling with each sigh of wind that crept in through the open balcony. There was a rhythm to the palace at dawn, a rhythm Cleopatra had come to love. Before the courtiers began their flatteries, before petitions were brought from the provinces, before the messengers arrived from Rome with their scrolls of veiled threats and half-promises, there was this fleeting hour of stillness when Egypt belonged only to her, when the marble corridors and the gardens heavy with dew seemed to breathe with her alone. Somewhere beyond the chamber, the sound of sandals brushing against the floor signaled the approach of her attendants, women who moved like shadows, carrying trays of oils, perfumes, and fresh linens. They would not wake her yet. They knew the queen rose when she willed it, not before. Outside, the first colors of sunrise began to spread across the horizon, staining the river and sea with streaks of copper and pale gold. The city awoke slowly, layer by layer, fishermen calling softly to one another as they pulled in their nets, priests stepping into temple courtyards to greet the sun with hymns to Ra, scribes unrolling papyrus sheets to record the new day's tributes and decrees. The scent of crushed herbs and honey drifted from the kitchens, where breakfast was being prepared for hundreds who served within the palace's slaves, guards, scribes, tutors, musicians, attendants, and those who tended the royal animals There were cats, sleek as polished bronze, sacred ibises kept for the priests, and even the quiet murmur of peacocks, whose feathers shimmered like fragments of the dawn itself. Cleopatra's world was one of sound and texture, of slow mornings and long rituals, where every act, no matter how small, was bound by tradition and meaning. To live as pharaoh was not to live freely, but to inhabit a ritual that never ended, a performance in which each gesture had the weight of history. When she finally opened her eyes, the light was soft and golden, filtered through thin gauze that hung before the balcony. For a moment, she simply lay there, gazing at the painted ceiling above her, where constellations of stars and symbols of the gods were rendered in blues and golds that shimmered like water. The faces of her ancestors surrounded her in the murals along the walls, stern, serene, and watchful. There was Ptolemy, the first founder of her line, once a general under Alexander the Great. There were the queens before her, Greek in blood, but Egyptian by spirit. Women who had ruled with cunning and ceremony, who had learned to speak the language of the people even as they prayed to foreign gods. Cleopatra often thought about them in these quiet moments, wondered whether they too had felt the same mixture of pride and loneliness that she did now. For all her power, she was alone at the summit, caught between worlds, the Greek and the Egyptian, the divine and the mortal, the East and the looming shadow of Rome. She rose slowly, the linen sheets slipping from her shoulders, her skin glistening faintly in the dim light. Two attendants entered soundlessly, carrying bronze basins filled with warm water, scented with lotus and palm oil. They knelt as they set them down, eyes lowered, movements rehearsed and deliberate. Cleopatra moved like someone long accustomed to being watched, each motion graceful, measured, without haste. As she washed, the water rippled with tiny reflections of the torchlight, and the scent of the lotus filled the air like a dream trying to linger. She allowed them to comb her hair, long and dark, until it shimmered like silk under the first shaft of sunlight creeping through the balcony doors. She wore a simple linen gown, at first plain white, bound at the waist with gold, not yet adorned with jewels or the ceremonial diadem that marked her as divine. That would come later, once she was fully transformed into the image of Isis reborn, the living goddess of Egypt. As the morning advanced, the sounds of the city grew louder beyond the palace walls. The murmurs of merchants, the neighing of horses, the clang of bronze doors being opened to let in the courtiers and envoys who would fill her day with requests and intrigue. Yet Cleopatra lingered in her chamber, preferring the company of her own thought. She stepped onto the balcony, the light warm upon her face, and looked out toward the harbor where the Pharos lighthouse rose like a pillar of flame against the sky. Beyond it, the sea stretched into a shimmering horizon, the same sea that led to Greece and, beyond that, to Rome. She thought of the legions, the senators, the consuls who spoke her name in their marble halls, some with admiration, others with suspicion, a few with quiet desire. The game she played was older than any empire, the game of survival, of power, of legacy. Yet here, beneath the vast Egyptian sun, all of it felt distant, unreal, softened by the lull of the waves and the hum of cicadas beginning their song. A scribe arrived soon after, bowing low as he presented a papyrus scroll tied with a red ribbon. It contained messages from the priests of Thebes and reports from the grain ports along the Nile. Cleopatra accepted it, but did not read. Instead, she turned it in her hands, feeling the texture of the papyrus, the faint warmth of the morning upon it. To rule Egypt was to be endlessly surrounded by words, decrees, letters, poems, prayers, all seeking to bind her within their meaning. Yet, in the end, she trusted only her own silence. The scribe waited, eyes lowered, until she nodded gently for him to withdraw. She returned to her couch and sat quietly, gazing out through the open doors where the palm trees swayed slowly in the wind. For a moment, everything seemed eternal. The light, the water, the scent of incense curling upward like a fragile thread toward heaven. It was in these still hours that Cleopatra felt most herself. Not queen, not goddess, not lover, but simply a soul adrift in time, listening to the heartbeat of her ancient land. The morning hours in Cleopatra's palace were never hurried, for time within those walls obeyed a different rhythm. One not measured by the pulse of ordinary life, but by the unfolding of ceremony. As the sun climbed above the horizon, its golden rays entered through the colonnades of the inner courtyards, spilling gently across pools of still water that mirrored the sky. The air shimmered faintly with heat, though the day had barely begun, and the light carried a kind of reverent hush, softening the edges of every stone and statue it touched. Attendants moved slowly through the corridors, carrying baskets of freshly cut lotus flowers, garlands of date blossoms, and small alabaster jars filled with sacred oils. Their sandals whispered upon the polished floors, echoing faintly beneath ceilings painted with constellations that told stories of the gods and the birth of the world. In one courtyard, priests chanted low hymns to the rising sun, their voices deep and droning, the syllables drawn out so long they seemed to melt into the air. The smell of incense drifted from bronze censers, curling upward in delicate spirals that seemed to vanish into the golden haze. Cleopatra's day began not with conversation, but with quiet observation. She sat upon a cushioned seat in a small garden adjoining her private chambers, surrounded by papyrus reeds and gentle fountains that murmured endlessly. The garden had been designed centuries before, when her ancestors first took the throne, and every tree, every stone had a history, each path laid in accordance with ancient symbolism. The sycamore represented the goddess Nut, who guarded the heavens. The palm trees spoke of resurrection and endurance. The lotus ponds mirrored creation itself, for from the lotus, the Egyptians believed the sun had first arisen. Here, the queen took her morning meal, a handful of figs, honeyed bread, and a cup of cool water from the Nile filtered through silver sieves. The taste of the bread was simple and familiar, and as she ate, she listened to the quiet world around her, the distant cooing of doves, the trickle of water from a carved lion's mouth, the faint hum of bees drifting between the flowers. Everything felt measured, deliberate, and steeped in ritual repetition, as though Egypt's pulse itself flowed through every breath she took. A small group of scribes sat nearby on low stools, their reed pens poised above rolls of fresh papyrus. They were there not to disturb her, but to be ready to note the queen's words should inspiration come, ready to record decrees or messages to be sent to the temples or the Roman envoys stationed across the sea. Yet Cleopatra spoke little in those early hours. She preferred to think, to dwell on the currents of her kingdom, like one might study the slow flow of a river. Egypt, she knew, was not ruled by strength alone. It was ruled by patience, the kind of patience the Nile had, wearing stone to sand across ages. To lead was to understand the rhythm of waiting, the art of silence. So she sat beneath the shade of a sycamore, her dark hair gleaming in the sunlight, her eyes half-lidded as though in meditation. From time to time, servants approached with offerings brought from distant provinces, a chest of linen from Memphis, papyrus from Fayum, alabaster jars from Thebes, woven mats from the desert oases. Each gift was received with the same tranquil grace. Nothing surprised Cleopatra. Nothing broke her composure. Even when a messenger arrived with news of Roman movement across the Mediterranean, she simply inclined her head, the faintest flicker of thought passing behind her eyes. Egypt had endured invasion, famine, and countless dynasties before her. She believed it would endure after her as well. The empire of Rome might be vast, but the Nile had a power older and quieter, a power that did not shout, only waited. Later in the morning, she walked through the hall of columns, her bare feet brushing against the cool floor. The pillars rose high as trees, each one carved with scenes of God's blessing the pharaohs. Light filtered down in slanted beams from openings high above, catching dust motes that drifted like golden snow. Along the walls, hieroglyphs told of triumphs, long past processions of kings, offerings to deities, the eternal balance of life and death. Cleopatra's hand brushed the surface of one of the carvings, tracing the outline of a goddess's face worn smooth by centuries. She often thought of those who came before her, not only her Greek ancestors, but the countless Egyptian rulers buried beneath the sands. To them, kingship had been a divine duty, not a pleasure. She wondered whether they, too, had felt the same solitude hidden beneath the layers of ceremony and splendor. At the far end of the hall waited her tutor and advisor, an elderly philosopher named Diocles, whose Greek robes seemed oddly plain amidst all the gold. His task each morning was to read to her passages from the old poet's lines of Homer, fragments of Plato. But she always insisted he begin with Egyptian hymns first. "We must honor the land before the mind," she once told him, and so he obeyed. His voice echoed softly as he recited verses praising the gods, his words blending with the hum of distant fountains. Cleopatra listened, with her chin resting lightly upon her hand, eyes fixed upon a shaft of sunlight that crept slowly across the floor. The sound of his voice lulled her into a kind of waking dream, where the present and the past seemed to merge. As the heat of the day thickened, servants carried palm leaf fans to stir the air, and the scent of melting wax drifted faintly through the corridors. Musicians entered the hall, 3 women dressed in linen, each holding a different instrument, a harp, a flute, and a sitar. Their music was soft and repetitive, rising and falling in gentle waves, perfectly suited for contemplation. Cleopatra leaned back, her gaze distant, her thoughts drifting toward the future. She must shape alliances to be forged, enemies to be studied, a legacy to preserve. Yet she did not speak of these things. She simply listened to the music and the philosopher's fading voice until both dissolved into the hum of the palace itself. When noon approached, she retreated again to her chambers, where heavy curtains shielded her from the brightness of the sun. The air was thick and still. A jug of cool water stood beside a bowl of dates and figs. The queen reclined upon her couch, the rhythmic sound of distant chanting from the temple below soothing her thoughts into stillness. The rituals of the day would continue without her. The offerings at the shrines, the petitions reviewed by her ministers, the endless machinery of rule grinding on. For now, she allowed herself to drift, to rest within that strange in-between state where thought became memory and memory became dream. Outside, the Nile gleamed like liquid gold beneath the unblinking sky, its slow current carrying both life and time through the heart of Egypt. Afternoon settled upon Alexandria like a veil of gold and dust, softening the outlines of towers and domes, turning the marble streets into rivers of reflected light. From the palace balcony, the queen could see the harbor shimmering its waters, rippling gently beneath sails that moved as slowly as drifting clouds. Far below, the markets had awakened fully, alive with the low hum of barter and the occasional cry of a vendor selling figs, linen, or polished bronze amulets. But within the walls of the palace, the air was cool and still, as though time had stopped in deference to the dignity of royalty. It was here, in these marble halls that stretched endlessly from one courtyard to another, that the machinery of the Egyptian state turned with invisible precision. Every corridor seemed designed to slow one's pace. The polished floors, the echo of footsteps, the quiet weight of columns that loomed like silent judges. Even the guards moved languidly, their spears held upright, their eyes fixed straight ahead. Cleopatra liked it so. Haste, she believed, was a Roman disease. Egypt was not built upon the frenzy of conquest, but upon patience, upon the slow pulse of the Nile, the measured cycles of its floods, the unhurried march of eternity. When she entered the hall of audience, the murmuring ceased. Courtiers, envoys, and scribes bowed low as the queen took her place upon the throne. A seat carved of black basalt, inlaid with gold, raised upon 3 steps that gleamed faintly under the filtered light. Behind her, a mural depicted the goddess Isis extending an ankh to the pharaoh, a reminder that Cleopatra ruled not by birthright alone, but by divine sanction. Her attire was simple, yet magnificent, a flowing robe of white linen, heavy bracelets of lapis and gold upon her arms, and upon her brow, the serpent diadem that glimmered faintly with emerald eyes. When she spoke, her voice was low and even, the tone of someone long accustomed to being obeyed without question. Yet there was gentleness in it too, a softness that carried through the air like a note from a harp. The audience began with routine. Petitions, merchants requesting trade permits, priests seeking funds for temple restoration, farmers appealing for irrigation rights. Each request was met with the same measured calm. Cleopatra listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or tracing a finger along the carved armrest of her throne. She did not speak quickly. She paused often, as if weighing not only the words, but the silences between them. The scribes recorded her responses in careful hieroglyphs, each symbol drawn with reverence, for her decrees were more than law, they were prophecy. The queen's patience was legendary, and though some envoys from Greece or Rome found it unnerving, to her people it was sacred. To act too swiftly was to offend Mat, the principle of balance, truth, and harmony that held the cosmos together. So Cleopatra ruled as the Nile flowed steadily, unchanging, eternal. Beyond the open arches of the hall, the sound of fountains echoed softly, mingling with the faint buzz of insects and the distant call of birds circling above the gardens. Light shifted gradually, tracing long patterns upon the floor that moved like shadows of passing clouds. A cool breeze drifted through, carrying with it the scent of cedar and sandalwood from the incense burners. Cleopatra's eyes, calm and unblinking, occasionally lifted toward the horizon visible through the archways, a horizon that led to Rome, the ever-present specter that haunted her reign. There were letters, always letters, from senators, generals, and allies, whose words dripped with both courtesy and threat. She understood their subtleties better than most men. The Romans were a people obsessed with control. They believed the world could be bent to their will, but Egypt, she often thought, was not a thing to be bent. It was a rhythm, an eternal song. Those who tried to master it would only find themselves lulled, drawn into its endless repetition. As the petitions continued, Cleopatra's mind drifted quietly toward the distant provinces along the Nile. Thebes, Memphis, Elephantine, places she had visited in her youth, each filled with temples older than memory. She recalled the smell of mud after the floods, the gleam of sunlight on the river, the laughter of children running along the banks. Power, she mused, was not found in the throne room, but in the hearts of those who labored unseen, the farmers who read the moods of the river, the priests who watched the stars for omens, the women who wove linen in the shadow of pyramids. Their quiet endurance was Egypt's true strength, and she felt herself, in moments like this, merely its steward, not its master. Yet she also knew that even patience must sometimes be disguised as action. Her alliances with Rome were not love, stories, as the poets would later claim, but performances in a theater where the stage was the world itself. Every gesture, every glance, every word had been calculated to preserve her nation's sovereignty in a world of hungry empires. By mid-afternoon, the light had dimmed to amber, and the hall grew drowsy with the warmth of the day. One by one, the courtiers withdrew, replaced by ministers bearing scrolls and tall jars of wax-sealed documents. They knelt and presented the kingdom's accounts, the harvest tallies, the trade revenues, the tributes collected in gold, grain, and spices. Cleopatra examined the seals, but rarely opened them herself. She preferred to hear the numbers spoken aloud in the careful voices of her treasurers. To rule, she once told her advisors, was to listen, truly listen, for even numbers had tones, harmonies, and patterns like music. When the recitations ended, she dismissed them with a faint wave of her hand and remained alone upon the throne. The air grew still, the only sound, the rhythmic dripping of water from the fountain beyond. She sat unmoving, her expression serene, her thoughts stretching far beyond the marble walls. The empire outside might rise and fall like waves, but within this hall, she was time itself, steady, unending, and absolute. The evening shadows lengthened, and servants entered silently to light fresh torches. Their flames shimmered upon the gold mosaics, filling the hall with a soft, flickering warmth. Cleopatra stood and descended the steps slowly, her bare feet soundless against the stone. The scent of lotus followed her as she moved through the corridor that led to her private library, a smaller, quieter echo of the great library of Alexandria. Shelves of papyrus scrolls lined the walls, their edges frayed from use, their ink faded by centuries. She often came here at dusk, when the world outside softened into twilight, to read or simply to sit among the whispers of history. The room smelled faintly of parchment and cedar. On a low table lay an astrolabe, a bronze mirror, and a tiny, alabaster figurine of Isis's offerings to knowledge and reflection. Cleopatra sank onto a cushioned seat and opened a scroll written in Greek, a treatise on the stars by a philosopher long dead. As her eyes traced the familiar symbols, her breathing slowed, matching the rhythm of the sea beyond the palace walls. The world around her seemed to dissolve into stillness. And as night crept over Alexandria, the Queen of Egypt read by the dim glow of an oil lamp, her shadow cast long upon the wall, the same wall that bore the painted wings of Isis, eternally outstretched. The palace slept around her, its corridors dark and quiet. Outside, the waves sighed against the harbor, and the city's lights flickered like tiny offerings to the heavens. Cleopatra closed the scroll at last, her eyes heavy, her thoughts drifting between memory and dream. Tomorrow would bring new audiences, new petitions, new calculations. But for now, she let her mind rest in the silence of ancient things, in the hum of eternity that pulsed gently beneath all human endeavor. By the time the sun reached its highest point in the sky, the palace seemed to drowse beneath its own brilliance, as though every stone, every leaf, and every drop of water shimmered in quiet surrender to the heat. The air outside quivered above the pale marble courtyards, and the scent of warmed jasmine drifted lazily through the corridors. Beyond the throne rooms and archives, where silence held the weight of ceremony, there stretched another world, the royal gardens, a realm of living color and subtle sound, where Cleopatra often sought refuge from the endless gravity of governance. The gardens of the Ptolemaic palace were famed throughout the Mediterranean, said to rival even those of Babylon in their breadth and beauty. Here, the queen could walk for hours without leaving the comfort of shadow. 4 colonnades and palm-lined avenues guided her through a landscape both cultivated and wild. The deliberate artistry of human hands, blending seamlessly with the patient work of the earth. There were pools lined with lotus and water lilies that floated like painted dreams, fountains carved into the shapes of lions and crocodiles, and pathways paved with mosaics that depicted the sacred Nile in all its glory, its fish, its reeds, its tranquil current winding between green fields. Cleopatra entered these gardens barefoot, her white linen gown drifting lightly around her ankles, the fine sand beneath her feet cool from the shade. Attendants followed at a respectful distance, carrying fans and jars of perfumed oil, but she rarely called upon them. She preferred the quiet, the rhythm of her own footsteps, the soft hum of insects hidden among the leaves. The sunlight, filtering through canopies of date palms, danced across her skin in trembling patterns. And the faint breeze carried the distant sound of music, harps and flutes echoing from somewhere within the courtyards. A pair of peacocks moved ahead of her along the path, their feathers glinting like jewels as they paused to drink from a shallow basin of water. Near the garden's edge, rows of pomegranate trees stood heavy with fruit, their scarlet shells glowing beneath the light. She reached out and touched one gently, feeling the smooth curve beneath her fingertips. a symbol of life's abundance, of Egypt's fertility and enduring spirit. Everything here, she often thought, was an echo of her country, lush yet fragile, ancient yet constantly reborn. At the heart of the gardens lay a large rectangular pool, bordered by stone benches and shaded by sycamores. The water was so still that the reflection of the sky appeared flawless, broken only when a dragonfly skimmed its surface or a falling leaf sent ripples across its calm mirror. Cleopatra sat upon one of the benches, her gaze distant, her expression serene. This was her sanctuary, a place untouched by politics or intrigue, where the chatter of courtiers could not reach her, and the only sound was the whisper of leaves moving in the afternoon air. The priests said that the gods could be found in such silence, in the spaces between sound and breath. She believed it. It was in stillness, she thought, that the truth of the world revealed itself, not in the speeches of diplomats or the noise of festivals, but in the soft murmur of water, the slow drift of shadow, the endless repetition of the wind through the reeds. She often came here after council sessions, when the weight of decisions lingered like dust upon her mind. Sometimes she brought scrolls to read philosophical treatises, poetry, hymns to Isis, though more often she let them rest unopened beside her, content to let the hours slip by unnoticed. The passage of time in the garden was not marked by clocks or ceremony, but by the changing angle of light. Morning's gold gave way to noon's brightness, then softened toward the blue haze of evening. Servants would bring cool drinks flavored with mint and honey, and sometimes figs on small bronze trays. Yet even these gestures felt like parts of a ritual older than memory. Everything moved in a circle: the seasons, the Nile's floods, the reigns of kings and queens. Cleopatra saw herself within that same cycle, not as its master, but as its vessel. She was both a daughter of Greece and a child of Egypt, born at the meeting of worlds, destined to keep the ancient current flowing, even as the tide of history changed around her. As she sat watching the water, a young servant approached quietly and knelt, offering a letter sealed with a mark she knew well, a Roman eagle pressed into red wax. The sight of it stirred no alarm, only the faint, inevitable awareness of the world beyond her walls. She broke the seal with a deliberate hand and unfolded the parchment. The letter, written in Latin, was formal, filled with careful flattery and subtle reminders of debt and alliance. It spoke of the movements of ships, of trade agreements, of political arrangements disguised as friendship. Cleopatra read it slowly, her eyes tracing each line, her mind drifting between comprehension and meditation. When she finished, she folded it neatly, placed it beside her, and resumed her gaze upon the pool. The letter could wait. All things could wait. In Egypt, she often reminded herself, time was not an enemy, but a companion. The Romans hurried through their days as though chased by shadows, but she knew that power lay in stillness, in the ability to pause when others ran, to listen when others spoke. The air grew heavier as the afternoon deepened. Bees circled lazily around the flowering vines, and the garden began to hum with life unseen. Somewhere beyond the walls, the city stirred, merchants calling from their stalls, children laughing in the streets, sailors unloading goods at the docks. Yet here, within this green sanctuary, those sounds reached only as distant murmurs, softened by distance and leaves. Cleopatra reclined upon a couch brought by her attendants and closed her eyes. The hum of insects became a lullaby, the warmth of the air a gentle weight pressing her into stillness. Her breathing slowed, and for a while she drifted between wakefulness and dream. In that half-sleeping state, she imagined the gods walking among the gardens, invisible but near Isis, whispering from the shade, Osiris passing silently beside the pool. They spoke not in words, but in sensations, the brush of wind, the gleam of light, the fragrance of blossoms. The queen felt her mind dissolve into that tranquil vastness, and for a time, she was not ruler nor woman, but simply part of the living earth. When she opened her eyes again, the light had softened, turning the marble paths pale, rose, and amber. Shadows stretched long across the lawns, and the air had cooled just enough to carry the faint sound of evening drums from the temple below. Servants appeared with torches, their flames flickering like fireflies as they lit the pathways one by one. The garden transformed under their glow, the trees turning to silhouettes, the pools to mirrors of liquid darkness. Cleopatra stood and took one last look at the tranquil water. The reflection of the torchlight trembled upon its surface, and in it she saw her own face, calm, distant, framed by the deepening dusk. She thought of the letter resting beside her, of the world beyond Egypt's borders, where decisions were being made in her name. Yet even that could not disturb the quiet that surrounded her now. Tomorrow, she would respond, perhaps even summon her envoys. But tonight, she would let the rhythm of the garden wash her thoughts clean. She turned slowly toward the palace, her figure graceful and unhurried beneath the archways of flowering vines. The attendants followed in silence, their torches lighting her path. As she passed through the colonnade, a faint wind rose from the direction of the sea, carrying with it the scent of salt and lotus. The stars were beginning to appear above the city, ancient constellations reflected upon the same Nile that had watched generations rise and fall. Cleopatra paused for a moment beneath the open sky, her gaze lifting toward those quiet lights. To rule, she thought, was to be like the stars, to burn steadily, silently, while the world below moved in endless cycles of light and shadow. Then, with a soft sigh, she entered once more into the cool depths of her palace, the night closing gently around her like a curtain drawn over a dream. The mornings that followed were filled with a kind of ceremonial stillness that belonged only to the palace, a rhythm both ancient and deliberate, measured by footsteps and whispers rather than ours. The rising sun poured its soft gold across the courtyard tiles, turning their pale stone surfaces into glowing pathways of light. From every corner of the city, Alexandria stirred awake with the sound of life beginning, the creak of carts on cobblestones, the cries of merchants, the steady beating of oars against the harbor waters. But within the palace, time remained hushed, as though it waited for the queen herself to give it permission to move forward. Cleopatra sat within the Hall of Pillars, a vast chamber cooled by shade and perfumed with cedar oil. Around her, officials and scribes stood in silence, waiting for her first command of the day. The walls were high, painted with scenes of conquest and fertility. Pharaohs offering gifts to gods, gods bestowing life upon the Nile, yet in their stillness, they also seemed to whisper reminders of impermanence. that even those carved in stone were once as mortal as those who now gazed upon them. Cleopatra's throne was modest by comparison to the grandeur surrounding it, though no less magnificent. It was made of dark ebony, inlaid with ivory and gold, a piece not meant to display wealth, but the weight of lineage. When she sat upon it, she seemed at once queen and priestess, her posture both graceful and firm, her voice quiet, yet carrying the calm authority that came from certainty rather than volume. The morning council had gathered to discuss the river's level, the harvest predictions, and the slow shifting of trade routes toward Roman oversight. These matters, though routine, were the lifeblood of the kingdom. Cleopatra listened patiently, her gaze moving from one speaker to the next, absorbing every word without reaction. Each scribe unrolled his papyrus scroll, reading numbers and reports that blended into a soothing monotony, measures of grain, accounts of taxes, the progress of temple restoration projects along the delta. The queen nodded occasionally, her hands folded upon her lap, her bracelets glinting faintly in the diffused light. To an outsider, it might have seemed tedious, but to Cleopatra, this was the heartbeat of Egypt, steady, dependable, ancient as the Nile itself. She found comfort in its repetition, in the way each season's concerns mirrored those of the last, creating an unbroken chain between past and present. The council chamber, though filled with men, felt like a sanctuary of order, where chaos was transformed into quiet lists, sealed decrees, and measured plans. Even the air carried the faint rustle of papyrus and the scent of ink, symbols of civilization's endurance. After the scribes had finished, the silence lingered for a while, the kind of silence that stretches between thought and decision. Cleopatra rose slowly, her gown falling in soft folds of white and gold, and walked toward the great map spread upon the central table. The map was an intricate work of art, a vision of Egypt drawn not merely in geography, but in devotion. Every temple, every irrigation canal, every trade route was recorded with meticulous care. She placed a hand gently upon the delta, tracing the branching lines of the Nile as though touching the veins of a living body. "The river is our heart," she said softly, more to herself than to the gathered men. "When it flows, the people live. When it falters, the world forgets us." Her voice was calm, measured, yet within it there was a deep resonance that made the listeners bow their heads instinctively. She asked a few questions about the granaries, the priests, the tribute ships from Upper Egypt, and each answer came with the same reverent precision. There was no haste, no anxiety. Decisions unfolded like slow ripples in still water after the council dispersed. Cleopatra remained seated by the map for a long time, staring at the gentle lines and symbols. The hall had emptied, leaving only the echo of departing footsteps and the faint murmur of doves outside the window. She rested her chin upon her hand and allowed her thoughts to drift, not toward ambition or power, but toward the meaning of continuity. Egypt, she mused, was not a kingdom merely to be ruled. It was a memory kept alive by its people, its rituals, its endless devotion to beauty and order. She often felt herself less a monarch than a caretaker of time. The world beyond her borders, Rome, Greece, the restless provinces moved with urgency, yet Egypt remained steady, bound to the rhythm of the Nile and the turning of stars. This constancy both comforted and burdened her, for even as she ruled, She knew she was only one thread in a tapestry woven over centuries, destined to fade like all who came before. Yet there was peace in that knowledge too, the acceptance that greatness, like the river, endures not through defiance, but through flow. Later in the day, when the light softened and the heat subsided, Cleopatra retreated to the library wing, a quiet sanctuary filled with scrolls that smelled faintly of papyrus and thyme. Scholars worked silently among the shelves, copying ancient texts, translating foreign philosophies, preserving fragments of knowledge that would otherwise be lost. She walked slowly between the rows, her fingers brushing the spines of scrolls like one greeting old friends. Here, the air was cool and thick with thought. She paused by a window overlooking the harbor, where ships bobbed gently upon the shimmering water. The sight reminded her of the fragile balance between isolation and connection, between Egypt's proud independence and its reliance upon distant trade. Knowledge, she reflected, was much the same. No nation truly owned it, yet each guarded it as though it were sacred. She smiled faintly at the thought, then took a scroll from the nearest shelf, an Egyptian hymn to the sun written centuries before her birth. Sitting by the window, she began to read aloud in a slow, measured voice, her words flowing in rhythm with the lapping of waves beyond the walls. "The light rises upon the land," she recited softly, "and all hearts awaken to see thy face." The words, though ancient, carried the same quiet reassurance she felt every dawn, that no matter how turbulent the world became, the sun would rise, and Egypt would breathe again. Evening came gradually, the light fading into shades of amber and violet. Servants entered with small oil lamps, their flames flickering like distant stars. The queen thanked the scholars in her gentle, unhurried way, then returned to her private chambers. There, she found the scent of lotus oil waiting. The faint hum of a lyre played somewhere nearby. She dismissed her attendants and sat by the open window, watching the Nile reflect the last blush of daylight. The river moved in silence, its slow current gleaming beneath the gathering stars. She thought again of her council, of their careful reports and measured tones. How fragile everything seemed, the harvests, the treaties, the balance of peace, and yet how eternal. The night breeze brushed her face, and she closed her eyes. She imagined the sound of the river as a voice, deep and patient, whispering to her across the centuries. All passes, it seemed to say, but all returns. The water that leaves will come again. In that thought, she found rest, her breath deepening, her body softening into calm. The palace beyond her window remained alive with distant murmurs, servants speaking softly, guards pacing, torches crackling. But within her chamber, the world had narrowed to the steady rhythm of her breathing and the quiet sigh of the wind. Through the reeds, as night deepened, Cleopatra rose, her silhouette framed against the pale shimmer of moonlight upon the river. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Rome waited, vast and hungry. Yet for now, Egypt remained her kingdom, her dream, her silence. And so she stood there, motionless, listening as the stars burned quietly above her. Eternal witnesses to a queen's endless meditation on time. When the day had retreated beyond the far edge of the western desert, and the first evening star appeared above the tranquil Nile, the palace began to glow like a constellation born upon the earth. Servants moved softly through the corridors, lighting hundreds of oil lamps one by one, their flames trembling against the polished marble walls. The scent of burning myrrh and cedar drifted through the air, mingling with the faint sweetness of lotus incense. Outside, the gardens had grown dim and silvered, their pools reflecting the moon like sheets of glass. The hum of the city faded to a whisper, replaced by the deeper, slower rhythm of the night, the distant call of an owl, the gentle splash of water from a fountain, the faint murmur of guards exchanging low words along the gates. Within her private chamber, Cleopatra prepared for the long night ahead, not of revelry or politics, but of reflection, for night was the time when she withdrew from the masks of rulership and became, for a few hours, simply a soul in solitude. Her chamber was vast yet quiet, its walls painted in soft blues and golds that shimmered faintly beneath the lamplight. At the far end stood a balcony that opened over the river, where the breeze moved like the slow exhale of a sleeping god. The bed, draped in fine linen and scented oils, rested beside a bronze stand upon which a single lamp burned with unwavering flame. The queen sat before a polished bronze mirror, her attendants gently unbraiding her hair, which fell in dark, glimmering waves over her shoulders. They removed the golden diadem that had crowned her during the day, the necklaces that shimmered like sunlight upon water, the armlets shaped as serpents that coiled around her wrists. One by one, the symbols of her reign were laid aside, leaving only the quiet dignity of her unadorned form, the living image of Egypt itself, serene, eternal, mysterious. When the last pin was set down, she dismissed her attendants with a nod, and the chamber fell into a deeper hush. Only the sound of the river remained, steady and unhurried. Cleopatra moved to the balcony and leaned upon the carved stone rail. Below her, the Nile stretched in soft darkness, its surface gleaming faintly where the moon touched it. Farther out, small fishing boats drifted, their lanterns flickering like stars upon the water. She could see the outline of the Pharos lighthouse in the distance, its great flame burning steadily atop the tower, guiding sailors through the night. That light, she thought, was like Egypt itself, constant, ancient, patient. She watched it for a long time, letting her mind wander through the silence. So much of her life was measured by sound, voices in council, footsteps in halls, the music of ceremonies. Yet it was in the absence of sound that she felt most alive. The night held its own kind of power, quieter than any decree, deeper than any speech. It was a reminder that even the most radiant empires existed beneath the same sky as every humble dwelling, that the pulse of eternity beat the same in palaces and in huts. She returned to her chamber and sat beside a low table covered with scrolls. Among them lay one she had read many times before, a collection of hymns to Isis, copied in careful hand by temple priests. She unrolled it slowly, the papyrus crackling faintly, and began to read aloud in a voice so soft it seemed meant only for the air itself. O radiant one, lady of the horizon, whose voice awakens the dawn, whose tears fill the river, whose breath stirs the fields, bless the one who walks among shadows with a steady heart. Her tone was neither devout nor dramatic. It was the voice of someone speaking to an old companion. She had long ceased to think of the gods as distant figures watching from beyond. To Cleopatra, they were woven into the fabric of life, in the rippling of water, in the scent of flowers, in the warmth of human hands. As she recited, she felt the familiar calm settle over her, a kind of stillness that began in the chest and spread outward, dissolving all worry and weight. It was in this stillness that she often found the strength to face the waking world. After she finished, she closed the scroll and poured a few drops of oil into a small bronze bowl, setting it alight. The tiny flame flickered and reflected in her eyes, doubling itself, as if two fires burned there, one of the earth, one of the spirit. She sat watching it, her breath matching its rhythm, the faint hiss of oil on metal becoming a lullaby. The shadows cast by the lamp stretched and swayed across the walls, taking the shapes of lotus blossoms, river reeds, and flowing water. Time seemed to loosen its hold, dissolving into an unmeasured present. Cleopatra felt herself drifting into memory, 2 childhood mornings in the palace courtyard, learning the languages of her ancestors, 2 quiet evenings beside her father, listening to stories of Alexander and the gods, to her first glimpse of the sea that stretched endlessly beyond the harbor. These recollections came not as vivid scenes, but as sensations, warmth, color, fragrance, like fragments of a dream that the heart remembers even when the mind forgets. Outside, the wind shifted slightly, carrying the distant scent of rain from the south. The Nile shimmered with faint ripples, and a cloud passed slowly across the moon. Cleopatra watched it move, its pale edges glowing like silver smoke. She thought of how the clouds, the river, and the stars all flowed in endless cycles, changing form but never ceasing. Perhaps, she mused, that was the secret of endurance, not permanence, but transformation. To survive, one must learn to change without losing essence. As Egypt had done for millennia, absorbing the touch of Greece, the influence of Rome, yet remaining unmistakably itself. She smiled faintly at the thought. The night taught her what no counsel could, that the greatest wisdom was quiet, patient, and without haste. As the hours deepened, the palace settled into complete silence. Even the musicians had ceased playing, and the distant voices of the guards faded to murmurs. The only sound was the rhythmic lapping of water against stone. Cleopatra reclined upon her couch, gazing upward at the ceiling painted with constellations. Each star had been rendered in gold, mirroring the heavens above, and for a moment she imagined herself floating among them, weightless, eternal. She traced one constellation with her eyes, the figure of the goddess, Nut, arching over the world, her arms and legs forming the horizon. It comforted her to think that even the sky was a living being, holding the earth in her embrace. The thought filled her with peace, a peace deeper than sleep itself. The lamp burned lower, its flame shrinking to a thin, steady glow. Cleopatra's eyes grew heavy, her mind softening into that gentle space between wakefulness and dream. She did not fight it. Sleep, she believed, was not an escape, but a return, a quiet reunion with the unseen rhythms that governed all things. She let her thoughts dissolve into the air around her, the scent of oil, the whisper of wind, the soft warmth of linen, the world beyond her walls, the politics, the envoys, the shifting tides of power receded until all that remained was this, a queen, a flame, and the endless night flowing softly above the Nile. And in that stillness, Cleopatra rested, not as ruler nor as legend, but as a soul adrift in the timeless calm of Egypt's eternal night. Morning came, not with noise, but with a long exhale of light, spilling gently over the horizon, turning the dark surface of the Nile into molten gold. The palace awoke in silence, as though the very air hesitated to disturb the tranquility that filled each hall. From her chamber, Cleopatra watched the slow unfolding of dawn, the way light crept across the city roofs, glinting upon domes and columns, waking the birds that had slept in the palms. The first sound she heard was the faint splash of water jars being filled in the courtyard below, followed by the melodic call of a priest chanting his morning hymn to Ra. It was a song as old as the river itself, sung every sunrise since memory began. Cleopatra closed her eyes and listened, letting the rhythm of the words blend with the murmur of the wind through the papyrus reeds. To live in Egypt, she thought, was to live within a poem written by the gods, every sound a verse, every breath a sacred repetition. She rose and walked to the window where the view stretched endlessly, the gardens still wrapped in mist, the distant pyramids rising faintly against the pale sky, the slow curve of the river bending toward the unseen south. The Nile had always been the heart of her kingdom, a flowing thread connecting gods and mortals, past and present. From its waters had risen food, wealth, and stories. Even now, barges glided upon it, carrying offerings, grains, and flowers bound for distant temples. Cleopatra often imagined the Nile as a living being, patient, ancient, and endlessly forgiving. The priests said its flood was the tears of Isis, mourning the death of Osiris, returning each year to renew the land. To the queen, that story was more than myth. It was truth, for she had seen how the river's generosity sustained even the poorest fishermen, how its silence carried the wisdom of centuries. She felt humbled before its constancy, for in its flow she saw her own reflection, the endless balancing of change and endurance. As the morning deepened, Cleopatra descended from her chambers and made her way toward the river's edge. The palace grounds stretched wide, their paths lined with flowering vines and sycamore trees whose leaves whispered with the faintest movement of air. Attendants followed her at a respectful distance, carrying her parasol and sandals, though she walked slowly, allowing the dew to cool her bare feet. The world was still new, washed clean by dawn. Bees hummed lazily among the blossoms, and somewhere in the distance, a heron lifted gracefully from the reeds. The queen paused at the edge of a terrace that overlooked the Nile, her gaze following its broad sweep as it curved away toward the delta. The surface shimmered like glass, reflecting the pale blue of the sky, the gold of early light, and the faint shadows of passing sails. She stood for a long while, breathing in the scent of water and earth, the mingling perfumes of river and garden. To Cleopatra, these moments of stillness were a kind of prayer, wordless, quiet, yet full of meaning. Nearby, a group of temple priests performed the morning libation. They poured milk and honey into the river, chanting softly as the offerings merged with the current. Cleopatra watched them in silence, their white linen robes fluttering faintly in the breeze. It struck her how small their gestures seemed against the vastness of the river, and yet how powerful, for each ritual, no matter how brief, was an act of remembrance, binding the living to the divine. When the priests noticed her presence, they bowed deeply. She inclined her head in return, then turned away to continue her walk. The path led her toward a small pavilion built beside the water, open on all sides so that the sound of the river was constant and near. Within, stone benches circled a low table carved with the symbols of the zodiac, reminders that the heavens and the Nile were forever in conversation. Cleopatra sat there often to read or simply to think. Today, she brought nothing but herself. The hours passed without notice. The sunlight shifted, turning from soft gold to the pale brightness of late morning. Occasionally, a barge passed its sail, painted with the image of a falcon or an eye carrying goods from the upper provinces. The rowers, seeing the queen, slowed and bowed their heads. Cleopatra responded with a faint gesture of her hand, her eyes following them until they disappeared downstream. She wondered what stories those men carried, what distant towns they had seen, what songs they sang to keep rhythm with their oars. Egypt was vast, and though she ruled it, there were parts of it she had never seen. Villages older than the palace itself, temples half buried by sand where forgotten gods still slept. Yet even unseen, she felt them near, for every grain of silt, every breath of wind, every ripple of the river carried their memory. After some time, she rose and returned slowly toward the palace. Along the way, she passed a group of children playing beside a pool, their laughter soft and unrestrained. It warmed her to see them, the innocence of their joy, the unthinking ease with which they accepted. She thought of her own children, of the uncertain future awaiting them. She had long understood that empires were fragile things, held together not by walls or armies, but by understanding, by the quiet art of patience. The Romans, she knew, did not understand patience. They rushed toward conquest as though time itself could be mastered. But Egypt, like the river, knew the strength of slowness. All things came to those who endured. She carried that truth within her as deeply as her heartbeat by midday. The air had grown warm, and the palace shimmered faintly in the heat. Cleopatra returned to her chambers, where servants had laid cool cloths and fresh fruit upon a table. She dismissed them with a smile, preferring solitude. Sitting by the open window, she peeled a fig and let its sweetness dissolve upon her tongue. Outside, the sound of cicadas filled the air, a steady, rhythmic hum that seemed to echo the pulse of the earth. She found the sound comforting, almost hypnotic. Her gaze wandered back to the river, now glowing white under the sun. She thought of how many lives it touched, farmers, traders, priests, kings, and how it never ceased to move, no matter who ruled its banks. She envied that kind of peace, the peace of purpose, fulfilled without struggle, perhaps, she thought. The greatest rulers were those who learned from rivers not to fight the current, but to flow with it. As afternoon drifted toward evening, the queen's mind grew quiet. The business of the day would resume soon, the scribes with their scrolls, the messengers with their reports. But for now, the world seemed suspended in a breath of stillness. Cleopatra closed her eyes, listening once more to the distant song of the priests. The words were old, the same her ancestors had heard, yet they felt timeless. Life flows like the river. Death is but its return. The phrase lingered in her thoughts, settling like dust upon a still floor. In that gentle moment, surrounded by the soft hum of life, Cleopatra understood that her reign, her beauty, her struggles all were ripples upon the same eternal water. She rose again. slowly and stepped out onto the balcony. The sun was descending now, its reflection stretching long across the Nile like a road of light. Boats moved lazily through it, their sails tinted orange by the fading glow. The city below began to awaken from its heat dream, voices rising once more, laughter echoing through the streets. Cleopatra watched it all, the water, the sky, the endless dance of light and life, and felt an immense calm fill her chest. Egypt was alive, and in that life, she too found meaning. She whispered a quiet prayer, not for power or victory, but for endurance, that her land, her people, and her memory might continue to flow as gently and eternally as the river itself. Evening came softly to Alexandria, not as an ending, but as a long sigh drawn from the heart of time itself. The city glowed beneath the fading sky, its marble streets bathed in rose-gold light, the sea turning from blue to silver as the horizon dimmed. From the palace terraces, Cleopatra watched the changing colors of the world she had ruled, the last shimmer of sunlight upon the water, the faint outline of the lighthouse at Pharos gleaming like a dying star. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and sea salt, and every sound, the call of gulls, the murmurs of distant waves, carried the weight of centuries. It was, she thought, the kind of evening that asked for remembrance rather than action. The world no longer rushed toward tomorrow. It simply breathed, slow and wide, like the sea beneath it. She stood wrapped in a robe of pale linen, her hair bound loosely, her face bare of the paint she once wore for ceremony. In this quiet hour, she was not the queen of Egypt, not the last of the Ptolemies, but a woman, one who had loved, ruled, lost, and now watched the sun retreat as if it too were weary. The palace behind her was nearly silent. The corridors, that once hummed with servants, advisors, and messengers, now held only the occasional echo of sandals brushing the stone. Even the statues seemed to dream, their eyes fixed upon some invisible horizon. Cleopatra felt the hush settle around her like a second skin, heavy yet gentle, final yet strangely kind. The great city that had once celebrated her triumphs and whispered her scandals now seemed to move in slow reverence, as though Alexandria itself understood the fragility of this moment. Beyond the palace, the harbor stretched wide, filled with ships that no longer belonged to her. Roman banners fluttered where Egyptian sails once caught the wind. The sound of foreign tongues drifted faintly through the air, the language of conquerors, sharp and unfamiliar. Cleopatra listened, but did not resent them. She had lived long enough to know that empires were waves, one cresting, another falling. Egypt had ruled the world once, then Greece, then Rome. The pattern was as natural as the tide. Still, the queen felt a quiet ache as she gazed upon her city, the place where she had been crowned, where she had dreamed of binding two worlds together. Now it was changing, slipping away from her grasp like sand between her fingers. Yet even in loss, she found beauty. There was something tender in impermanence, a strange dignity in knowing that all things must fade. She turned from the view and began to walk slowly through the palace gardens, her bare feet brushing against the soft earth. The air was warm, heavy with the fragrance of lotus and myrrh. Torches flickered along the pathways, their flames swaying like small, patient souls. Cleopatra paused beside a reflecting pool where lilies floated upon dark water. The surface mirrored the sky, and for a moment She could not tell where the heavens ended and the earth began. A faint ripple disturbed the reflection as a breeze passed, scattering a few petals across the water. She watched them drift, slow, aimless, peaceful. "So to do we," she whispered. "So to do we all." The words vanished into the air, but she felt them linger somewhere in her chest, a truth both melancholy and soothing. In the distance, the sea murmured softly against the harbor walls. Cleopatra remembered the sound from her youth, how she used to listen to it as a girl, imagining faraway lands and adventures beyond the horizon. Back then, the world had seemed limitless, and her destiny had glimmered like the morning star. Now, it felt smaller, enclosed, but no less sacred. Every corner of her palace, every statue, every column was heavy with memory. She could almost hear laughter echoing from the banquet halls, the music of flutes, the rustle of silk, the voices of philosophers debating under torchlight. So many faces, so many dreams, all gone like dust upon the wind. Yet memory itself felt alive tonight, flowing through her like the Nile, unending, patient, luminous. In remembering, she realized she did not lose. She continued to live through the echo. The moon rose quietly over the sea, pale and wide, casting a silver path across the water. Cleopatra lifted her gaze to it, her eyes soft with reflection. The priests once told her that the moon was the mirror of the soul, ever-changing, yet eternal. Tonight, she believed them. She felt her spirit expanding, dissolving into the stillness around her. Power, beauty, conquest, all the things she had once held dear, seemed suddenly small beside the infinite calm of the sky. What mattered now was not victory, but peace. She walked toward the edge of the garden, where the sea breeze was strongest, carrying the faint taste of salt. The horizon shimmered with quiet light, and she felt as though the world were holding its breath. Somewhere within the palace, a torch sputtered and went out. The scent of oil drifted faintly in the air. Cleopatra turned back for a moment, her eyes tracing the familiar outline of the palace walls. She had built so much here, not only in stone and marble, but in thought, in dream, in legend. And, though the Romans might claim the land, they could not claim her story. That, she knew, would live on, whispered in the corridors of time, painted in temples, carved into the hearts of poets. History was not a sword, but a song, and her verse had already been written in gold and sorrow. She smiled faintly, touched by the quiet irony that her defeat would become her immortality. At last, she returned to her chamber. The lamps were dim, the air cool. Upon a small table lay the symbols of her life, scrolls, jewels, and a simple golden diadem. Cleopatra ran her fingers over them slowly, not with longing, but with gratitude. They had served their purpose, as she had served hers. A small brazier glowed in the corner, the smoke curling upward like a spirit released. The queen sat by the window once more, looking out at the moonlit city. Alexandria lay silent beneath. Her gaze, a vast mosaic of rooftops and courtyards, shimmering like the surface of a dream. She could hear faint music drifting from the distant taverns, the song of sailors carried softly on the wind. The world, it seemed, was already moving on, gently, inevitably. Cleopatra closed her eyes and breathed deeply. The scent of the sea mingled with the faint perfume of the night flowers. In her heart, she felt no fear. only a calm acceptance that all stories, even those of queens and gods, must find their quiet ending. Beyond her window, the waves continued to move, eternal and indifferent, carrying with them the echoes of her reign. And though her body would one day turn to dust, her spirit would linger here, in the river, in the wind, in the endless rhythm of the tides. Egypt, she thought, would remember her not as a ruler, but as a reflection of its own soul, brilliant, mysterious, and enduring. The night deepened. Stars appeared one by one, scattered like ancient prayers across the dark. Cleopatra rose once more, standing in the soft silver light. She whispered something, a word, perhaps a farewell, and let the silence carry it away. Outside, the sea whispered back, calm and eternal. And as the final light of day faded from the horizon, the Queen of Egypt, the last daughter of the Nile, watched the world become a dream, her story merging gently with the endless river of time.